The grand Halcyon Hotel ballroom shimmered under the weight of its own importance. Crystal droplets hanging from chandeliers threw tiny rainbows across the walls. The air smelled like expensive perfume, old money, and the sharp, clean scent of starched linen. It was the annual charity gala for the city's symphony orchestra, and everyone who was anyone had turned up in silks and tailored suits, their voices a-low. Polite murmur that echoed off the marble floor. Among the glittering crowd, she moved like a shadow. Her name was Alara, though no guest here would ever think to ask. To them, she was just another part of the scenery, a silent figure in a stark black dress and a crisp white apron. She held a heavy silver tray laden with flutes of champagne, each bubble rising in a golden stream. Her eyes, a quiet shade of hazel, were fixed on the glasses, on the floor, on the spaces between people. Never directly on the guests' her feet. Insensible black shoes didn't make a sound. She navigated the clusters of conversation with a kind of invisible grace, pausing just long enough for a hand to reach out and pluck a glass from her tray. A murmured "thank you" sometimes came her way, but more often it was just the quiet clink of crystal being taken. She was a service, not a person, and she preferred it that way. From her place by the wall, she watched the real show. There, in the center of a rapt circle, was the guest of honor, Julian Thorne. His name was spoken with a certain reverence all night. The celebrated concert pianist, young, handsome, with a reputation for brilliance and a sharper one for arrogance. He held a glass of mineral water, not champagne, and held court with a confident smile. An instrument has a soul, he was saying to a woman dripping in diamonds. The piano at the Royal Festival Hall, for instance, sings. This one. He gestured vaguely toward the grand piano sitting silent on a small stage at the end of the room, its lid propped open like a sleeping mouth. A hotel piano. It's all show. The tone will be flat, the action sluggish. It's for decoration, not for art. A few people in the circle laughed, a little too eagerly. Alara's gaze flicked to the piano. A beautiful 9-foot Steinway, polished to a mirror shine. She knew it wasn't just for show. She knew its sound. She moved on, slipping through the crowd toward the kitchen doors. The heat and clatter of the kitchen hit her like a wall a world away from the chilled elegance of the ballroom. Here, voices were raised, pans clanged, and the head chef barked orders. "Tray 3, Alara. Go, go." A server said, rushing past with a platter of miniature beef Wellingtons. She loaded her tray with fresh champagne flutes, the cold moisture beading on the silver. Her shift supervisor, a tired-looking man with a clipboard, touched her arm. "You okay on the floor? Thorne's a piece of work, but the donor he's talking to wrote a 6-figure check last year. So just keep the bubbles flowing near that group, yeah?" Alara simply nodded. She had mastered the art of the silent nod. It ended conversations without offense. She pushed back through the swinging doors, the bubble of kitchen noise cutting off abruptly as she re-entered the world of soft murmurs and clinking glasses as the night wore on. She saw the planned program begin to unravel. The event organizer, a woman in a severe burgundy gown, kept checking her watch, her smile growing tighter. The string quartet that had been playing gentle background Mozart in the corner packed up and left. A murmur of confusion began to ripple through the crowd. Where was the main entertainment? Alara was replenishing her tray at the service station when she saw the organizer, Miss Brennan, rush over to Julian Thorne, her face pale. "Mr. Thorne, a disaster," she hissed, trying to keep her voice low. Alara, wiping a water spot from a flute, couldn't help but overhear. The jazz trio their van broke down on the highway. They won't make it. Julian Thorne's eyebrows rose. He didn't look concerned. He looked mildly amused. A shame. But these things happen at these amateur events. The guests are expecting a performance, Miss Brennan pleaded, her composure cracking. After your speech, there's a 30-minute slot. We can't just have dead air. Would you? Could you possibly? Just a short piece? You'd save the evening. Thorne looked over at the Steinway, as if it were a rusty old tractor. He gave a short, dismissive laugh. My dear woman, I have a concert in Vienna in 4 days. My hands are insured for more than this hotel's annual revenue. I don't do impromptu performances on unknown, poorly maintained boxes. It's out of the question. The rejection was absolute, delivered with a smooth, casual cruelty. Miss Brennan looked like she might be sick. She scurried away, already pulling at her hair, looking desperately around the room, as if a musician might magically appear from behind a potted fern. Alara's hands, holding a damp cloth, had gone still. She stared at the piano. A memory, sharp and sudden, pierced through her, the feel of cool ivory under her fingertips, the deep, resonant hum of a low C vibrating up through the bench, the weight of a crowd's expectation, the terrifying, glorious silence before the first note. It was a feeling she had locked away years ago. A lifetime ago. She shut it down, clenching the cloth. That wasn't her world anymore. She was the one with the tray, the one in the apron. She turned back to her glasses. Panic was now visible among the hosting committee. Huddled conversations were happening in corners. The guests were starting to notice. The polite murmur was rising into a confused buzz. Someone suggested putting on the radio. Someone else, disastrously, suggested karaoke. Julian Thorne watched it all with a detached smile, sipping his water. He leaned over to a companion. See? This is what happens when you prioritize fundraising over artistry. No real professional to step in. His words, clear and carrying, reached Alara. They didn't make her angry. They just made the memory of the piano's voice louder in her head. It wasn't about him or his snobbery. It was about that beautiful, silent instrument being insulted. It was about the room full of people who had come for beauty, being offered a cheap substitute. Miss Brennan, in a final act of desperation, walked toward the small stage, a wireless microphone in her hand. Her smile was a grimace. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. A slight change in the program. This was it. They were going to ask for volunteers to sing. The evening, meant to celebrate music, was about to become a cringe-worthy joke. Alara looked down at her tray, then at her hands. They were good hands for a waitress, strong, steady, with short, clean nails. But they were shaped for something else. They remembered. A deep, old ache awoke in her knuckles. Not from carrying trays, but from hours of practice, from stretching for octaves, from the ghost of a melody that had never quite left her. She saw the first guest, a flushed, tipsy man in a tuxedo, being nudged toward the stage by his friends. The crowd let out a nervous, encouraging laugh. Without thinking, almost without breathing, Ilara set her heavy silver tray down on the polished surface of the service station. It made a soft, final clink. She untied her apron, folding it neatly and placing it beside the tray. It was a simple series of actions, but they felt monumental. Like shedding a skin, she didn't look at anyone. She didn't walk to the center of the room. She simply moved, as she always did, along the edges, a quiet figure in a simple black dress. But this time, she wasn't heading for the kitchen doors. She was walking toward the light falling on the stage, toward the silent, waiting piano. A few people near the service station watched her, confused. Was she going to clean something? Stop the drunk volunteer? She reached the 3 shallow steps leading up to the stage and climbed them. The drunk gentleman, seeing her approach, paused, microphone in hand. Miss Brennan stared, utterly bewildered. Elara didn't take the microphone. She walked past it, past the confused man, and stood before the Steinway. For a long second, she just looked at it. Then, she reached out and ran a single finger along its closed lid, a touch so gentle it was almost a caress. She pulled out the bench. It scraped softly on the hardwood floor, a sound that echoed in the suddenly curious quiet. She sat down. She adjusted the bench's position by a mere inch, a small, precise movement that any pianist would recognize. It was the first thing she had done all night that seemed entirely, unquestionably her own. She placed her hands in her lap, took a slow, deep breath that lifted her shoulders, and let it out. The room had grown still. All the confused murmurs had died. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on the waitress on the stage dot in the crowd. Julian Thorne stopped smiling. He leaned forward, his studied boredom replaced by sharp professional curiosity. He saw the way she sat, the straightness of her back, the poised stillness of her head. It was a posture he knew. It was the posture before a storm. Elara lifted her hands. They hovered for a heartbeat above the black and white keys. Then she began to play. The first notes were not what anyone expected. They weren't loud or flashy or fast. They were slow and a little bit broken. She played a single low chord with her left hand. It hung in the air, deep and sad. Then her right hand came down, playing a simple melody just a few notes above it. It sounded old and lonely, like a music box winding down. It was the opposite of a party trick. A few people in the crowd shifted, unsure. Was this a joke? Was she just plinking the keys? The man with the microphone shrugged and stepped back, surrendering the stage completely. The event planner, Miss Brennan, stood frozen, one hand pressed to her chest, her face a mask of pure fear. This was worse than karaoke. This was a disaster in the making, but Elara didn't seem to hear them. She was somewhere else. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing the ballroom. They were looking at the keys, or maybe through them. Her face, usually so blank and careful, had softened. There was a faint line of concentration between her eyebrows, but also something else, a deep, quiet sadness. The simple melody repeated, but this time her left hand added a little more. Another chord, richer this time. The music began to breathe. It was still slow, but it was growing. It had a pulse. A woman near the front, an older lady with silver hair, caught her breath. She recognized this. It was the beginning of something not at his table. Julian Thorne had gone completely still. The casual, leaning back posture was gone. He was sitting up straight, his glass of water forgotten on the tablecloth. His head was tilted, his professional ear straining. He knew this piece. Of course he knew it. Every serious pianist did. It was the beginning of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, but not the part the audience usually hears. This was the opening of the first movement, a part usually played by the piano alone before the orchestra comes in. It was a test of touch, of emotion, of control. It was not for beginners. It was certainly not for hotel staff, and she was playing it as if she were pulling the notes up from the very bottom of the piano, from the floor, from her own bones. Elara's hands, which had looked so ordinary holding a tray, were now alive. They moved with a strange, flowing grace. The fingers weren't stiff. They were strong and sure, pressing deep into the keys to pull out a thunderous low note, then floating up to dance lightly in the higher octaves. The music swelled. The sad, searching melody began to find its courage. It built and built, climbing higher, getting louder, the chords underneath it becoming more complex. A storm of dark, beautiful sound. The last traces of conversation in the room died. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning. You could hear the rustle of fabric as people turned fully toward the stage. No one was looking at their phones. No one was glancing at their watch. They were caught not in the kitchen. The swinging doors bumped open a crack. A dishwasher, hands still wet, peered out. A line cook stood behind him, wiping his hands on his apron. They listened, their faces blank with shock. "Is that Elara?" the dishwasher whispered. The cook just shook his head. Back in the ballroom, the music transformed. The lonely search was over. The melody broke free into the famous, passionate, sweeping theme. It poured out of the piano, rich and golden and full of a powerful, aching hope. It was a sound so big, it seemed impossible. It was coming from one person, from that quiet woman in the black dress. People felt it in their chests. A young couple who had been arguing quietly by the dessert table earlier in the night unconsciously moved closer together, their hands finding each other. The older woman with silver hair had tears silently tracking down her powdered cheeks. A stern-looking businessman closed his eyes, his stern expression melting away. Lost in a private memory, the music had unlocked. Elara was no longer playing the piano. She was fighting it, loving it, wrestling a universe of feeling out of it. Her body moved with the music, a slight sway, a lean into a powerful chord. A strand of hair had come loose from her tight bun and fell against her cheek. She didn't brush it away. Sweat glistened on her temple. Julian Thorne was no longer just listening. He was analyzing, dissecting. His eyes were narrowed, fixed on her hands. Her technique was flawless, but it wasn't cold. It was hot with feeling. The way she managed the difficult crossing of hands was effortless. Her control of the dynamics, the whisper-soft passages that suddenly erupted into thunder, was masterful. This wasn't someone who had taken lessons as a child. This was a player, a real one, and she was playing his piece. The piece he had performed with the Berlin Philharmonic just last year, to a 5-minute standing ovation. He felt a hot, sharp twist in his gut. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the shock of seeing a ghost. A ghost of talent he thought only existed in the world's great concert halls, not hiding behind a serving tray. He watched her face. There was no smile of triumph, no look of pleasure at the crowd's captivation. There was only a deep, profound seriousness, a total absorption. This was not a performance for them. This was something necessary, something private that was happening in public. She was playing like someone who had been starving, and this was her first meal in years. The music soared to its climax, a series of crashing, magnificent chords that shook the crystals in the chandeliers. Elara's shoulders hunched with the effort, her fingers a blur. And then, as suddenly as it had exploded, it began to pull back. The music softened, gentled, returning to a version of that first lonely melody, but now changed. It was no longer a question. It was a memory. A goodbye. The final notes were a soft, resonant chord in the lower register. She held the pedal down, letting the sound vibrate and fade slowly into silence. Then she lifted her hands and placed them gently back in her lap. She was breathing deeply, her chest rising and falling. She stared at the piano keys as if surprised to find herself there. For a long, long moment, there was absolute quiet. Then the room erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a roar, a physical wave of sound. People jumped to their feet, their chairs scraping back in a chaotic symphony. They clapped so hard their hands stung. Whistles cut through the air. Shouts of bravo and encore came from all sides. The sound was deafening, a wall of pure, stunned admiration. The bright, hot spotlight that had been meant for Julian Thorne all evening now blazed down on Elara, trapped in its circle on the stage. She blinked, looking out at the standing, cheering crowd as if waking from a dream. The reality of what she had done crashed into her. The hundreds of eyes, the noise, the sheer size of their reaction. A flicker of panic crossed her face. She looked like a deer caught on a highway. She stood up, her movements stiff now, the grace gone. The bench scraped again. She gave a quick, awkward, almost imperceptible bow more of a nod of the head, and then she turned. She didn't look at the cheering people. She walked quickly, almost hurriedly, off the side of the stage, back toward the shadowy edges of the ballroom, back toward the service station where her apron lay folded. But the crowd wouldn't have it. The applause didn't fade. It followed her. People were craning their necks, trying to see where she was going. Miss Brennan, her face now flushed with joy and relief, was rushing toward her, hands outstretched. "My dear, that was astonishing. Please, come back." Julian Thorne was also on his feet. He wasn't clapping. He was pushing his way through the crowd, his eyes locked on the retreating figure in the black dress. He had to know. He had to understand. Ilara reached her tray. For a second, she looked at it, then at her own hands, which now felt empty and strange. She reached for her apron, as if to put the uniform back on, to become invisible again. But it was too late for that. The spotlight had found her. And two very different people: one, a hostess desperate to save her event. The other, a proud man whose whole world had just tilted, were moving through the cheering crowd, both determined to reach her before she disappeared back into the shadows for good. The wall of sound from the crowd hit Ilara like a physical thing. It was so loud it seemed to push the air out of her lungs. For years, her world had been one of quiet footsteps, soft clinks of glass, and low murmurs. This roaring applause was an avalanche. It terrified her. Her eyes, wide and a little lost, scanned the blur of standing, clapping faces. She didn't see admiration. She saw a hungry, curious spotlight that had finally found its target. The safe, invisible shell she had built around herself for so long had just been shattered by her own hands. A cold dread washed through the heat left from the music. She moved on instinct. Get away. Get back to the quiet. She almost ran off the side of the stage, her sensible shoes clicking a quick, sharp rhythm on the hardwood. She didn't look back. She kept her gaze fixed on the far wall, on the service station with its neat rows of clean glasses and her folded, white apron. That apron was a promise of normalcy, a symbol of the simple, predictable life she had chosen. The event planner, Ms. Brennan, cut through the crowd like a ship's prow. Her earlier panic was gone, replaced by a glowing, triumphant energy. She reached Ilara just as her fingers brushed the starched cotton of the apron. "My dear." "Wait, please." Ms. Brennan's voice was high with excitement. She grabbed Ilara's hand, not to shake it, but to hold it, to stop her from leaving. "That was? I have no words. You saved the entire evening." "No, you made the evening." Ilara tried to gently pull her hand back, but the woman's grip was firm. "I should get back to work," she said, her voice barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse and the intensity of the performance. It sounded strange to her own ears. "Back to work?" "Don't be silly." Ms. Brennan laughed, a bright, tinkling sound. "The guests want to meet you. They want to thank you. The chairman of the symphony board is right over there. He's desperate to talk to you." Over Ms. Brennan's shoulder, Ilara could see a cluster of important-looking people moving toward them, smiling broadly. She felt her chest tighten. This was her worst nightmare, being pulled into the center of the very world she had fled. Before she could be surrounded, another figure stepped into the space. He moved with a different kind of intention. Not the bustling excitement of the hostess, but a slow, deliberate focus. It was the famous pianist, Julian Thorne. The crowd near them quieted a little, sensing a new kind of drama. He stood before Ilara, looking at her not as a waitress, not as a savior of the party, but as a fellow musician. His earlier arrogance was gone. In its place was a sharp, searching curiosity. "The opening of the Rachmaninoff," he said. His voice was quiet, meant only for her and Miss Brennan. Not many attempt it. Fewer understand it. You understood it. Elara met his eyes for a second, then looked down at the floor. She didn't know what to say. "Thank you" felt wrong. She just wanted him to go away. "Where did you study?" he asked. It was the natural question, the first thing any pro would ask another. She shook her head slightly, a tiny movement. "A long time ago." Her voice was still a thread. "But with whom?" "That technique. It's not self-taught." He was pressing now, a detective on a case. He needed to fit her into a category, into a story he understood. Ms. Brennan, sensing the tension but misreading it, beamed. "See? Even Mr. Thorne is impressed. This is incredible. What's your name, dear?" The simple question felt like a trap. Giving her name would make this real. It would connect the person she was now to the ghost who had just played. She hesitated. "Elara," she finally said, almost reluctantly. "Elara," Julian Thorne repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I've never heard of an Elara in the competition circuits. You should be on stage, not serving drinks." His words, meant perhaps as a compliment, felt like a knife. They pointed directly at the chasm between her past and her present. A flush of something shame, anger, sadness heated her cheeks. "I am happy serving drinks," she said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. There was a peace in the simplicity of it. No screaming critics, no aching pressure, no constant fear of the one wrong note that could end everything. Julian Thorne's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe her. He could see the musician in her, the one who had just poured a lifetime of feeling into the piano. That person could never be happy just carrying a tray. He saw the conflict on her face, the way her body was angled toward the kitchen doors, ready to flee. "Play something else," he said suddenly. It wasn't a request. It was a challenge. "Right now. Something you love. Not Rachmaninoff. Something for you." The small crowd that had gathered around them held its breath. Miss Brennan looked thrilled at the prospect of another performance. Elara felt a surge of panic. This was exactly what she didn't want. To be put on display, to have her private relationship with music turned into a public spectacle. She shook her head, more firmly this time. "No, I have to go." She turned and finally managed to pick up her apron. She didn't put it on. She just held it in front of her like a shield. She took a step toward the swinging doors to the kitchen. "Wait!" Julian Thorne's voice stopped her again. He wasn't used to being refused. But his tone had changed. The challenge was gone, replaced by something quieter, more confused. "Just tell me why. Why are you here?" Elara paused, her back to him. She looked at the kitchen doors, where the dishwasher still peered out, his face full of awe. She thought of the hot, noisy sanctuary inside, where no one asked questions, where she was just another worker. She thought of the crushing silence of an empty concert hall after a failed audition, a silence louder than any applause. She didn't answer him. She couldn't. The words were too big, too tangled. Instead, she pushed through the swinging doors, and the roar of the ballroom was cut off, replaced by the familiar, clanging chaos of the kitchen. For a moment, there was complete silence in the kitchen, too. Every cook, every server, every dishwasher was staring at her. The head chef, a large man with a permanently red face, slowly put down his knife. He walked over to her, wiping his hands on his apron. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the apron she was clutching in her hands. "Well?" he grunted, his voice rough. "That was something else, Elara. Didn't know we had a celebrity on the payroll." It was a joke, but his eyes were kind. He wasn't angry. He was impressed, and maybe a little protective. "I'm sorry," she whispered, thinking she had caused trouble, broken some rule. "Sorry?" The chef barked a laugh. "The party planner just called. They want to send in a case of the good champagne for the staff. Said we harbor a national treasure." He shook his head. "Take 5. Get some air. You look like you've seen a ghost." Grateful, Elara nodded and walked past the staring eyes, out the back door of the kitchen into the quiet, dark alley behind the hotel. The cool night air hit her face. The sounds of the city were distant here, the rumble of a garbage truck, a siren far away. She leaned against the rough brick wall, closed her eyes, and let out a long, trembling breath. Inside, the party was buzzing with a new energy. But the center of it all was gone. Julian Thorne stood by the silent piano, a frown on his face. He placed a single finger on a key and pressed it softly. The note hung in the air, pure and simple. He thought of the storm of music that had come from this same instrument minutes before. He thought of her hands and the story they told that her mouth refused to speak. He wasn't going to let this go. A talent like that didn't just disappear into a kitchen. It was a mystery, and he had to solve it. He turned from the piano, his mind already working, planning his next move. The quiet waitress had played her piece. Now, he realized, the real performance was just beginning, and he intended to be part of it, whether she wanted him to be or not. The cool air of the alley was a shock to her system. It smelled of damp concrete and distant city rain, a world away from the perfumed ballroom. Elara pressed her back against the rough brick, feeling its solid chill through her thin black dress. She could still feel the vibration of the piano keys in her fingertips, a phantom tremor. The roar of the applause echoed in her ears, a ghost sound. She just breathed, in and out, trying to push the last hour back into the locked box where it belonged. It had been a mistake, a moment of weakness. Seeing that beautiful piano insulted, watching the night turn into a joke. Something in her had snapped. But now the crack was there, and light was pouring through, and she didn't know how to seal it up again. Inside, the party had found a new life. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a buzzing, excited energy. People clustered in groups, talking animatedly, their eyes flicking toward the now empty piano and the kitchen doors. The story was already being polished into a legend. Asterisk, did you see it? The waitress. Like something out of a movie. Asterisk Julian Thorne stood apart from it all. He had accepted a glass of champagne, but didn't drink it. He watched the kitchen doors. He had given her 10 minutes. That was enough for air, for composure. Now he needed answers. He set his glass down and moved. He didn't go through the main kitchen doors. He found a discreet corridor marked staff only and followed it. The sounds of the party faded, replaced by the hum of industrial coolers. He passed a locker room, hearing the murmur of staff changing shifts. He felt out of place in his tailored tuxedo, but his purpose drove him forward. He pushed open a heavy metal door and found himself in the alley. And there she was, a silhouette against the brick, her head bowed, looking smaller than she had on stage. She heard his footsteps and turned. When she saw it was him, her body went rigid. Not with fear, but with a kind of weary resistance. She'd hoped he would just forget her, get bored, move on to someone more interesting. "You can't hide out here all night," he said. His voice was softer than it had been in the ballroom, less demanding. "I'm not hiding. I'm working," she replied, but the excuse was weak. Her apron was still bunched in her hands. He took a few steps closer, stopping a respectful distance away. He looked up at the narrow strip of night sky between the buildings. You know, most musicians would kill for a reaction like that. They'd be in there, soaking it up, making connections. I'm not most musicians. That, he said, looking back at her, is the first true thing you've said to me. He paused. Why did you stop? The question hung in the damp air. It was the heart of it. Elara crossed her arms, not looking at him. She could give him a simple lie. Asterisk, I lost interest. I got injured. Life got in the way. Asterisk, but he was a pianist. He would know. He had heard the truth in her playing, the years of discipline, the love, and the deep, unresolved pain. It stopped being about the music, she said finally, her voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear. It became about everything else. The right people, the wrong notes, the critics, the constant feeling that it was never, ever good enough, that I was never good enough. The piano, it started to feel like an enemy, a thing that judged me and found me failing. She swallowed hard. Out here, no one expects anything from me. It's quiet. Julian was silent for a long time. He'd heard versions of this story before. The burnout, the pressure cooker of the classical world. But it was different hearing it from her, seeing the reality of it, a world-class talent serving canapes to avoid the strain of its own gift. That piano in there isn't your enemy, he said quietly. I was wrong about it. You showed me that. An instrument is just wood and wire. It only plays what we bring to it. You brought something real tonight. Something most of us in there, he gestured back toward the hotel, spend our lives faking. His words surprised her. They weren't flattery. They were an observation, and they felt honest. She glanced at him, really looked at him for the first time. The famous Julian Thorne, here in a grimy alley, talking to her like she was a colleague. It was absurd. What do you want from me? She asked, tiredness seeping into her voice. I want to hear you play again, he said simply. Not for them. Not for a party. Just to play. Tomorrow. The concert hall downtown is empty in the mornings. I have access. The offer hung in the air, huge and terrifying. The thought of sitting at another piano, with him listening, sent a jolt of pure fear through her. It was one thing to get caught in a moment of passion at a party. It was another to willingly walk into the lion's den. No, she said, shaking her head. I can't. You can. You just don't want to. He took a step closer, his expression intense. I heard what you did in there. That wasn't just skill. That was a voice that has something to say, and you're letting it suffocate in a kitchen. His own voice grew more passionate. Do you know how many technically perfect, empty players there are in the world? I am one of them on my bad days. You? You have the thing we all pretend to have. The heart. And you're treating it like a secret shame. His bluntness was like a slap. It shook her. She had spent so long thinking of her past as a failure, a wound. He was reframing it as a treasure she was throwing away. I have a life here, she said, but the protest sounded weak even to her. Do you? He asked. Or do you just have a hiding place? Before she could answer, the metal door creaked open. It was the head chef. He looked at Julian with clear suspicion, then at Elara. Everything okay out here, kid? He asked, his voice a low growl. Elara nodded. Yes, it's fine. The chef didn't look convinced. Your shift ended 10 minutes ago. The party's winding down. You should go home. It was a dismissal and a protective one. He was giving her an out. Julian understood. He took a small, elegant card case from his inside pocket and pulled out a plain white card. He held it out to her. On it was just a phone number, handwritten in dark ink. The hall opens at 9, he said. I'll be there until noon. No audience. No expectations. Just a piano and a choice. He placed the card on a clean ledge of brick near her, not forcing it into her hand. "The choice is yours." He gave a brief, respectful nod to the chef, then turned and walked back down the alley, his footsteps echoing before he disappeared through the metal door. The chef walked over, picked up the card, and looked at it. He whistled softly. "Fancy." He handed it to her. "You gonna go?" Alara took the card. It felt heavy. "I don't know." "Look," the chef said, his rough voice softening. "I don't know music, but I know people. And what you did in there tonight, that wasn't just doing a job. That was who you are. You can't just turn that off forever, kid. It'll eat you from the inside." He clapped a big hand on her shoulder. "Now go home. Get some sleep. And for God's sake, don't make any decisions when you're tired." She changed out of her work dress in the quiet locker room, her movements slow. The card was in her purse. She could feel its presence like a live wire. The night bus home was mostly empty. She stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one a blur. She thought of the silence of her small apartment. She thought of the quiet, orderly routine of her life, the morning coffee, the bus ride, the uniform, the predictable rhythm of service. It was safe. It was numb, but the memory of the music wasn't quiet. It was a roar inside her head. The feeling of the keys, the way the sound had filled her up and poured out of her. It had felt like coming home, like breathing after years of holding her breath. She got off the bus and walked to her building. As she put her key in the lock, she realized her hands were trembling again. But this time, it wasn't from fear or exhaustion. It was from a terrifying, fragile sliver of hope down the stairs in the silent dark of her apartment. She took the card out of her purse. She laid it on her small kitchen table. The handwritten number seemed to glow in the moonlight from the window. She had a choice. She could throw the card away. She could show up for her shift tomorrow at the hotel as if nothing had happened. The world would eventually forget the waitress who played piano. Or she could walk into an empty concert hall at 9 a.m. She sat at the table for a long time, watching the moonlight creep across the floor, her heart pounding a frantic, hopeful, terrified rhythm against her ribs. The invisible woman was gone. Now she had to decide who would step into the light. The night was long and full of ghosts. Alara didn't sleep. She sat at her small kitchen table, the plain white card staring up at her from the scratched wood. The city outside her window went from the deep blue of late night to the gray of early dawn to the pale gold of morning. The sounds changed too, the occasional wail of a distant siren, the rumble of the first garbage trucks, the gentle chorus of waking birds. Her mind was a battlefield. One side, the tired and safe side, begged her to tear up the card, to go back to the hotel, put on her apron, and disappear into the simple, predictable rhythm of work. That life had no surprises, no terrifying heights, no crushing falls. It was flat ground, and after years of stumbling, flat ground felt like a gift. The other side was a voice she hadn't listened to in years. It was quieter, but it was stubborn. It was the voice that had made her walk to the piano last night. It didn't speak in words, but in feelings, the memory of the music flowing through her, the solid weight of the keys, the way the sound had vibrated in her chest, making her feel real and alive for the first time in forever. The famous pianist's words echoed. Asterisk, you have the thing we all pretend to have. The heart, was that true? Or was he just seeing what he wanted to see? Maybe her playing was just a ghost, a leftover habit from a dead past. When the clock on her stove clicked to 8:15, her body stood up before her mind had decided. It was as if her legs had made the choice for her. She took a shower, put on plain clothes, a simple shirt, comfortable pants, and looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't see a waitress or a pianist. She just saw a woman, tired and scared, with shadows under her eyes. She put the card in her pocket. She didn't know if she would use it, but she needed to have it with her. The downtown concert hall was a grand old stone building. In the daylight, it looked imposing, like a temple. The main doors were locked. Her heart, which had been pounding, began to calm. It was a sign. She should leave. Then she noticed a smaller black door off to the side, slightly ajar. She pushed it open and found herself in a cool, dark backstage area. It smelled of dust, old wood, and polish. She could hear a single clear note being played on a piano over and over, somewhere in the distance. A tuning note dot. She followed the sound through a maze of ropes and curtains, her footsteps silent on the concrete floor. She emerged into the wings of the main stage. The vast hall spread out before her empty. Thousands of red velvet seats waiting. The morning light streamed in through high windows, catching dust motes dancing in the air dot, and on the huge stage, under a single work light, was a concert grand piano. And Julian Thorne, he wasn't playing. He was sitting at the bench, his back to her, perfectly still. He was just listening to the technician finish tuning. He was waiting. Alara almost turned and ran. This was a mistake. This was his world, his cavern of expectation. She didn't belong here. But then he spoke, without turning around. His voice carried easily in the empty space. It's a better piano than the one at the hotel. The action is lighter. The tone is clearer in the upper register. Come and see. He had known she would come. Or maybe he had just hoped out slowly, like someone walking to the edge of a cliff. She stepped out of the wings and onto the stage. The floor was solid, the boards worn smooth by decades of performers. She walked to the piano. He stood up from the bench and moved away, heaving her space. He didn't smile. His face was serious, respectful. It's all yours, he said simply. The technician is finished. No one else is here. She looked at the piano. It was beautiful and terrifying. This was an instrument for masters, for legends. Not for her. I don't know what to play, she whispered, her voice swallowed by the huge, quiet hall. Yes, you do, he said. He walked down the stage steps and sat in the front row of the audience, far back in the shadows. He became just a shape. Not a critic, not a star. Just a listener. Alara sat down. The bench was different. The height was wrong. She adjusted it, the familiar small scrape echoing. She placed her hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth. She played a single scale, slowly. The sound was breathtaking. It was pure, it was rich. It filled the hall with a warmth that the hotel piano could only dream of.